Now, if there's one thing I know about hiking these fields and making these videos, it's not a clean job. You can't get to the point of history out here and show people what really went on if you're doing it from your car. Wayside markers, not a thing. It's great for the public to go see, but if you really want to get to the point of what really happened out here, you got to get into these fields and these woods and get dirty. That's what I like to do. I like to walk these fields, bring the story of these soldiers to everybody, and frame it for them so that they can understand exactly what these men went through out here and exactly what the families went through. I mean, imagine you're here, you're in that farm right there, and thousands of Confederate soldiers are marching across your fields, destroying your crops, scaring off your animals, and all you can do is sit back and hope and pray that a cannonball doesn't come blasting through your house and killing your family, or that the bullets that are whirring through your flatboards on the side of your house, that one of them don't hit your family members. The Sherfies had to worry about that. So if you really want to get to it and do something good, get out in these fields, walk around and check it out for yourself, and see real history on the ground. General Lee has a decision to make on the evening of the 1st of July. His men have just come through town over here on this ridge that I'm at right now, Seminary Ridge, and they have stormed past these Union soldiers which have been defending all of this land behind me. They've been fighting ridge line to ridge line. And for those that have not been to Gettysburg before, the movie doesn't paint the picture the way it should. The movie is grandiose and great for a fun time to watch on TV. But that battle starts miles down the road, and it works its way through the ridges into town in Gettysburg, long before the township even shows up on the map. The Union soldiers have been fighting for almost a full day before they start to break. And they end up running back through town in this direction, past the house that I'm going to go to right now, the Mary Thompson house. And they have to give way. They don't have an option. They're being overran. And at that time, they were also outnumbered. The Confederates were coming up and concentrated, and the Union soldiers weren't yet all together. So Lee gets here to this headquarters, and nighttime's coming upon him, and he's got a choice. Do they stay here and fight on these ridges and try to take the heights in front of them and be aggressive in the morning? Or do they give way and try to find another position? Well, given the success that he's having here, he decides that he's going to have to attack. But his battle plans are, they're really hard to understand if you don't know tactics. The way this is supposed to work out is his men are supposed to find an opening on the right and then sweep across the field towards the right flank. They're also supposed to attack the left flank over on the Culp's Hill. The battle plans are put in place. He gives them to his officers, and they go out to try to commit to those plans the very next day. But a lot of things go wrong. One of those things happens to be General Dan Sickles. Nobody expects Dan Sickles to do what he does. His own generalship, General Meade, his commanding officer, doesn't expect him to do what he does. He ends up extended out past his lines almost a full half mile. Because of that, he brings on a general engagement, and he kind of throws the Confederates off guard. They were expecting to not have anybody in that location. They thought that the battle line only extended to a certain point and that they were going to sweep across the field, hit the flank, and then drive the Northern soldiers off of Cemetery Ridge. Didn't happen that way. Dan Sickles gets in the way, and somehow accidentally it turns out to be the best mistake of his life. Now, in order to really understand where the fight starts for the peach orchard, you have to cross the street, go across the fields to where the Confederate line is on Seminary Ridge, right around where the Longstreet statue is at the amphitheater. Now, there's a sign, a wayside marker, that has a hand on it that points in this direction, and it says 3rd Maine and Bird End Sharpshooter. If you go down that road, and I prefer going on foot instead of driving, which is what I'm doing right now, you'll see a wayside marker and a statue. This location is where the first contact was made between the 3rd Maine and Bird End Sharpshooters with that right flank of the Confederates. When they get over here to this position, roughly where I'm at right now, they run right into skirmishers for that right flank. That's the pivotal moment that changes everything for the 2nd day of July. It changes Confederate battle plans, it changes the fight here in these woods, and it changes what happens at the peach orchard in the Wheatfield. Because of the reconnaissance that happens over here, the Confederates now know that they're spotted. They know that the Union soldiers know that they are out in this position. They have to change their plan rapidly, which means they've got to get it together quick, and they've got to start coming up with their battle plan and putting their men in position and getting ready to fight, because they're no longer hidden. And so that's what they do. They do counter marches. They do all kinds of stuff to try to get into position. They still think there's a chance to get on them with a surprise attack. And the plan is simply just to sweep across the fields, kind of wheeling a little bit to the left-hand side, all in succession together, and then making their way towards the flank. It doesn't work out that way. So here we are at the top of the tower, and over in this location is the Pitcher Farm. And then coming around this corner here, you can see James Warfield Farm and the Henry Spangler Farm. So Warfield and Spangler. And then moving on off in this direction here is Cadore Farm, the Klingel Farm, and the Sherfy Farm. Now Sherfy is the one that's closest to us over here. And if you look off on the ridge there, that's that small patch that's called the Peach Orchard, but really it extends out in this direction. On July 2nd, the Confederates thought that the right flank, or the left flank of the Union soldiers was right here. They were wrong by this much. The flank is actually over here somewhere, and it stretches all the way out. And the general idea for the movements out here on this field for the Confederate soldiers was to come down to this direction, move, turn, sweep across this field. And as they're going across, they're hitting the flank, enfilade fire down the flank, and then move those soldiers out of that position. That's not what happens. Now if you look out at the peach orchard and just behind it, you'll see a cleared field out there. Now that wood line that's back there behind that, you can see where Cemetery Ridge is. Originally, this is where Sickles is, and he ends up moving his men all the way out and angles them there for a salient on the peach orchard. You can follow those monuments as they come around and then they angle back in this direction, and then off in the woods over there is where they run into the Wheatfield and then the Rosewood Farm and the Rosewoods over here, and the Rocky Stony Tops. And then, of course, Little Round Top becomes a highly contested, most important area right over here. You can barely make out the actual monument that sits at the very top of Little Round Top over there. I'm out here on a rocky foundation of something that used to be out here in the fields. You can tell because of the shape of it. The grass has grown up around the rocks, and there's no way to really to cut the grass in this area. But it gives me a good view from here because this is a high point. This is an area where you can stand and look down to the valley below and see everything that's going on out here. Now, if you look directly off behind me here, you can see the hill rolls down. Soldiers from this position would have had to have gone down this hill, and they're swinging around in this direction here, right? So, you have the farm sitting off over here. Let's see if we can get that in the view. You have the farm over here. You got Little Round Top that's way off there behind it. And then swinging off in this direction over here, the Wheatfield. And if you go all the way back over here to where it's clear, you can see that clearing over there just past the White House. That is where the beginning of the Sherfy Peach Orchard is. Now, out in those fields over there, the Union soldiers have skirmishers placed. That's the advanced soldiers that are out there to agitate the enemy as they're coming along the lines, but also to give the advance warning to the main body as the soldiers are coming up. Soldiers from this location here, Confederate soldiers, would have had to swing down these hills and move in concert with each other off in that direction. It did not work out that way. You had one unit that ended up completely in front of another, and instead of them extending their lines out and driving off the enemy together side by side, you have some of them that were double stacked in front of each other, which they weren't supposed to be. And you had some Confederate lines that had actually turned and opened up a gap in between themselves. And one actually swung so hard that it left its flank open to the enemy fire from the rocky tops over here. And onslaught fire hit them so hard that there was nothing left for them to do but retreat. They could not continue with the fight. Now, of course, the officers that were in charge of those units, after the battle was over with, they were pointing the finger at each other. And the order that was given for that was actually given for only, according to the leading officer, for only just the one unit at the very end. But at either rate, you can see what they're facing. The Confederate soldiers here are coming down this hill, and they're headed in that direction. And the artillery is placed up over there, a large portion of it right there, where that clearing is, the peach orchard, just over my shoulder. That artillery can be felt all the way over here. They have artillery placed out here in the Rocky Hills, and then eventually they have the artillery placed at Devil's Den. That ends up being the extent of the line when Governor K. Warren comes out and he realizes that nobody's there to protect the Round Tops. He sees that height. He knows the importance of that land. And that's when you have the story of the 20th Maine coming up and all those men that fought over there so heroically against the Alabamians in that location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you down to some of this terrain here, walk down a little bit further so you can see the thickets of woods that are headed towards the Wheatfield and all that, and then we'll get into position over the peach orchard, the Wheatfield, and Devil's Den, and we'll talk about how this thing all started and about how the fight ended up, really, with the Confederates taking the entire section of land between here and Cemetery Ridge almost. I mean, July 2nd was a pretty big victory for the Confederate soldiers that were out here. And realistically, the reason why Robert E. Lee probably thought to himself, we can push them off that line the next day. It wasn't as clear-cut as everybody made it out to be. If you come out here and walk these fields, you take that tour and you talk to some of these battlefield guides about what happened out here on the peach orchard on July 2nd, you'll have a better understanding. You'll know why. Now, if you're a soldier up here on these rocky heights, this is what you're sheltering behind. You've got these large boulders and you're sandwiched in between these rocks. And generally they were out in the open anyhow. They didn't come behind these rocks unless they absolutely necessarily had to. But soldiers would shelter in place here. Just like anybody with any common sense. A big large rock, get behind it. Hopefully I don't get hit by a bullet. This is one of the neat places that you can go to over here near Devil's Den and the Little Round Top and all that, and see stuff like this. Now, to start this whole thing off, I have to take you out to a location so that you'll understand why Dan Sickles made the decision that he made. Now, from the location that I'm going to right now, Geary was out here initially holding this spot. Dan Sickles receives orders to come out here and put his men in the same place that Geary had his men. Dan Sickles claims that he sent his staff out here and then eventually made his way out here too. And when he got to this position, he realized that this was not an advantageous spot. He had requested more confirmation on where he was supposed to go and that he wasn't clear on his orders. Now, a little battlefield orientation. Over here is Little Round Top. And if we come back around to the right side, you have Devil's Den off in this area over here, with the slaughter pen being right in that area there. Now, directly off to my front here, it's this long slope you can see, and then a clearing off in the front right there. That's where the Wheatfield is. If you look off in the distance, that white picket fence is way out there in the distance where the cars are going by. That's where Sherfy's Peach Orchard is. And then back here we have the Wychard Farm, which is that small white house. And down this way is Cemetery Ridge. Now, in a straight line from here all the way down is where Dan Sickles was supposed to place his men. And this was going to be the extreme left flank of the Union Army. And he was going to anchor his men somewhere in this vicinity. Had he come out to this area and noticed this little round top, then perhaps he wouldn't have been so focused on the peach orchard. But when Dan Sickles came into town and rode by that high ground out there nearer to the enemy, his main focus at that point in time was he needed to get his men to that high ground so that he could place his artillery on that position. And he stayed so silently and stuck so focused on that position that he was blinded by what was happening around him. So now forever focused on this position that he's in, where he really wants to get his men out to the peach orchard, or to that high ground that we're talking about, Dan Sickles sends back wanting confirmation of orders. George Meade sends his son out to give him that confirmation. When his son gets to the camp, they tell him that the general is resting. It's a superiority move, really. Captain Meade tries to tell him what the orders are, and he's really not listening to it. He asks for confirmation again. George Meade himself eventually has to come out to the lines to talk to him about where he's at. But once he gets those orders, he then asks if he has the authority to take up ground where he sees fit within the vicinity of his location. And he was given that authority, but he took liberty with that authority, and he moved his men so far out front that he ends up creating not only a salient, but several gaps in the Union line, and he leaves the high ground over here at Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and all of that completely open. And that's what creates the havoc that we have at the Devil's Den, the Wheatfield, and the peach orchard. Had it not been for Dan Sickles moving his men out there, the Confederates might have swept across that field and taken that left wheel and hit the end of the Union line and maybe swept them off the field here at Gettysburg. It might have been a different story. So, from one point of view, Dan Sickles did not follow orders and created a situation that General Meade had to fix. But from another point of view, Dan Sickles brought on the fight, and he might have accidentally caused a situation that saved this flank over here. Now, Gettysburg Battlefield, just like Antietam, is known for not only mass carnage, but the pictures of the dead that were taken out here on these fields. And I'm in a location that's probably one of the more sobering locations on the field. Directly behind me here, in that position right there, is where a soldier's body was drug up the hill in front of me, positioned with a gun by his side, and carefully placed so that a photograph of a Confederate soldier could be taken out here on these fields, and I guess mocked up to look like a sharpshooter over here facing Devil's Den and Little Round Top. It's the photographs like that that were brought back home to the families that not only were a stark reminder of what they were facing and the consequences of their war, but it was also a very real human touch, because the young man laying on the ground, his face is tilted towards the camera. You can see his last expression that he had in his life as he lay there on the ground, dying. You're not quite sure what the young man was thinking in his last few moments of life. And everybody puts themselves in the shoes of that young soldier. They think to themselves what they would think or what they would do. Most said that they would pray. Others said they would think about home, their mothers, their fathers, maybe their wives. Little did he know that when he was dying on these fields, a photographer would come out here, move his body, take his image, and for years and years after, it would be one of the most famous photographs from a wartime period ever. and millions of people would see him laying on the ground. Something else. Now, realistically, the fight for the Wheatfield, Devil's Den, Peach Orchard, all of that stuff, it doesn't get started in earnest until about 4:30 in the afternoon. The artillery barrage starts to open up. That's when you have artillery across the field there at the Peach Orchard firing to Seminary Ridge and trying to take out the guns of the Confederates, which were about 600 yards away at this point. Then you have Sims and Anderson stepping off from their position over here near the Rose Farm, headed towards the Wheatfield and the Peach Orchard, and part of them headed off towards Devil's Den. So the location that I'm at right now is where the famous stone wall is, where the 17th Maine had headed down that stone wall and used it for cover. Not only did they use it for cover, but they stayed there to try to delay and stop as much as they could the Confederates that were coming on. Anderson's men performed the way they were supposed to in this location. They had attacked exactly like they were told to do, but for some reason, Sims ended up wheeling into a position where his flank was exposed. So as the cannons opened up on Wheatfield Road towards Sims, they were firing down his flank, and enfilade fire was rapidly taking out the Confederates. Eventually, Sims gets into the fight after having to fall back, and you have Anderson and Sims and a few other units out here. They're back and forth across this field behind me, which is the Wheatfield, just over my shoulder there. They're constantly back and forth with each other fighting. Eventually, right around 6-ish p.m. is when the Union lines give way at the Peach Orchard. When that collapse happens over there, the efforts over here are stalled, and de Trobriand's men that are in this position here and in the Stony Hill right in front of me there, they have to fall back. Just as they fall back, you have Cross and Zook and Kelly come up to save the day. Those units spread out across this field and on up into the Stony Top there, and again the fight continues on for the Wheatfield, which is just right over there. That Wheatfield changes hands several times just within a short period of time, a couple of hours. The Confederates would sweep across this field, and they would win the field momentarily, and then the Union Army would come back, sweep back across this field, and push the Confederates back. It was a deadly back and forth game here until the night came. And then this low-lying valley where I stand right now, there was a story of a young man out here, and they don't know who he was, but he was singing so soft and so sweet that all the voices around hushed to listen to him sing. And there was definitely different tales of what song it was, but the most common is Kathleen Malvorning. But he was singing that song, and it echoed throughout the fields here. And as I talk now, I can hear my voice echoing. And that beautiful voice came across these fields and hushed the enemies so that they could listen. And for some reason, everybody kind of went into a low period listening to that. Even some of the wounded calmed down. Once the song was over, though, the nightmares of the battle began. You could hear the dead dying and wounded. You could hear people screaming, crying, begging for water. You could hear the footsteps of soldiers throughout these woods that didn't know exactly what lay in front of them. You could hear people crawling, scraping, trying to get to one side or the other. This field was a nightmare of epic proportions. Today it's a beautiful, grand view with cannons on ridges and placards for stories. But this field, tied into the peach orchard, is a place of nightmares. And I don't think I would ever want to be a part of this. Now, the one thing I like about Gettysburg the most is there's a story for everybody here. Doesn't matter who you are. You can take something from this field and learn from it. You can connect to the personal human stories. You can connect to the battle if you want to. And in the many ways that you can connect to the stories out here, you can also explore it. If you're not the type of person to get out on the dirty trails and walk around in the hot summer sun or the wet spring or the blistering cold, there's plenty of roads, there's plenty of sidewalks and paths, and there's also plenty of museums. I think it's probably why so many people connect to these fields, because the storytelling out here is the best. It's better than any other field, any other battlefield that I've ever been to. And in large part, the reason for that are the licensed battlefield guides. Now, they're the true pros. They're the historians that have spent a great portion of their life studying this battle, not just in text, but studying it on the field, understanding it, the moves, the positions. I was fortunate enough while I was out here to have a tour by a battlefield guide named Teresa Orr. She was definitely an excellent tour guide out here, and you could tell why they do what they do. They have a passion for this stuff like no other, and it's almost as if they can see it unfold in front of them when they're telling you the story. So next time you make your way out here, if you haven't done so already, go have a battlefield guide take you out to these fields. You can focus in on one area if you want to, or you can focus in on the entirety of the battle. But it's definitely time well spent. So now we're out here on the Wheatfield, in the middle of it, and it's not a very large field at all. As de Trobriand's men were about to falter and fall back from the fighting that they had done, Zook, Cross, and Kelly come up just in the nick of time, and they make an immediate impact. But as they're over here on these fields, Zook is on his horse, and he's riding up behind his men, and he's hit. He falls from his horse. His men see him fall. They go to aid him, but it's already too late. Zook's mortally wounded. He becomes one of 4 generals out here to die at this battle. That's a pretty distinguished list. But nevertheless, his men fight bravely without him, and they do him justice out here in these fields. Zook, Cross, and Kelly's impact can't be overstated. Their men out here holding this position and keeping the Confederates from sweeping across this field and taking the flank at that moment in time when Mississippi comes up and crushes the peach orchard. Imagine this place falls. It's clear all the way around the side. The Confederates can then wheel again and turn towards the enemies that are fleeing at the peach orchard and sweep that field off in the direction of Cemetery Hill. That would have been a general's dream, but it wasn't to be, because in the position that we're at right now, this hard-fought ground. The many men that died here to keep it. They really saved the day. And they saved the battle over here at the Wheatfield, Devil's Den, and the Round Tops. Somehow that didn't make it into the motion picture. So somewhere out there in those fields, Barksdale falls mortally wounded near a run, and some Union soldiers come up to try to take him off the field and make him their captive. And as ornery as ever, Barksdale looks up at him, and he's a pretty hefty guy, and he looks up at these scrawny Union soldiers and he says, "Boys, you're going to need a lot more than that to take me." And they have to muster up a couple more guys to get out there and pick this heavy man up and take him off the field so that they can get him help. And the entire time that he's getting help at the house that's just past Cemetery Ridge, he's ornery as ever. He's in there cursing and well, maybe not cursing, but he's in there getting aggressive with the people that are trying to help him, you know. And his manner and his habits really get in the way of people that are trying to just help him out. The old fiery politician comes through all the way to the end. Now let's talk about the artillery duel that happened across the street here. There, at one point in time, are 86 guns going at each other, firing all kinds of shot and shell. And the blaze was so hot that E.P. Alexander says it was the hardest fought artillery duel he's ever been in. And that's saying a lot, because he was here on the 3rd day of July, too. They're firing sometimes at ranges of 600 yards or less at each other. And one of the New Jersey units that are out there ends up firing 1,342 shots during this duel. That's an extremely large amount of cannon fire coming from one unit alone. So you can imagine you're marching across these fields and that canister's flying over your head, flying around you, taking your buddies out, knocking their legs off, knocking their heads off, hitting them dead center in their chest. It's probably a nerve-wracking, scary thing. But a lot of soldiers said that they leaned into it like they were walking towards a hailstorm, hoping to not get hit. So in the end here, what do we really have? Well, we've got a story about men fighting each other across these fields and trying to survive. We have human interest stories. We have brother versus brother, and sometimes brother fighting alongside a brother. But what we really have is devastation and loss. Now, Ken Burns just the other day said that there was a moment when he was doing his filming for the Civil War series that they had to put the track on pause before the gun goes off and Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. And everybody in the room just stops in their tracks, and their tears come into their eyes, because for a brief moment in time they feel like they stopped the assassination. Lincoln's still alive. And then when they press it and let it go, the gunshot goes off, and they know that they just recorded the end in their documentary of Lincoln's life. Well, that's what we have here when we walk these fields. You come out here with your heritage and your ancestry, and realistically you walk these fields and you try to think of what they went through, no matter what the side is. And you think about the death and destruction, the human story that's out here. And for a moment, when you're learning about day 1 and you're learning about day 2, and even just before 1 o'clock, July 3rd, 1863, there's still some people that are alive on this field before they make that march across it and die. So when you come here and learn about history, that's really what you have. You're reliving that history through your thoughts and your imagination, and for a moment, it's still going on, and those people are still alive, and they still have a chance. They still have a chance to live. But they all have a story, and it's very important. And I think that's what's so important about telling these stories and coming out to these places. That's why I highly encourage you to get out here and see it for yourself. Walk these fields and live through these stories, and then tell them to your family members and their family members, and save it for all time. Preserve a battlefield. I really couldn't think of a better way to end this video than crawling through these trees here near the Roses farm, across this stream, up to the loop. It's been a lot of fun taking you guys out here to Gettysburg to talk about the Battle of the Peach Orchard and try to connect this. I know I can't do it justice. I could probably do this a million times over and not fully tell the entire story, because it's such a large story to tell and a lot of history to cover in just a couple of short days. But I did my best, and I really hope you guys enjoy this video and come back for more. Please subscribe. You guys keep me going. And yeah, just check out all the good history that's out there. Until next time, this is History with Waffles.